Why did Spain discover the New World, despite Portugal's superior maritime technology? The answer lies in the question itself. It was precisely because of Portugal's superior maritime technology that they discovered a calculation error in Columbus's plan for a voyage to the west. Consequently, they rejected Columbus, allowing the Spanish to take advantage. Columbus argued that since the Earth is a sphere, sailing westward would still allow him to reach the east, and the distance would be shorter. However, Portuguese experts, after studying his presentation, discovered that he had underestimated the Earth's volume by a quarter, and the distance to the east was half the actual distance. With such an outrageous error, Columbus was unlikely to receive funding from the Portuguese government. Therefore, he sought his luck in Spain, Portugal's rival. Although the Spanish didn't spot Columbus's calculation error, they still considered his plan too crazy and rejected it. However, with Spain's land unification complete and the urgent need to pursue Portugal by sea, they decided to take the risk and send Columbus, leading to the Treaty of Santa Fe. The agreement stipulated that the Spanish government would provide financial and manpower support for Columbus's expedition, in exchange for a tenth of the wealth of the new territories and some political rights. The Spanish gamble proved successful, while the Portuguese's cleverness backfired. In August 1492, Columbus, with 3 ships and 90 sailors, embarked on what would become the greatest voyage in human history. The fleet consisted of the 130-ton Santa Maria, the 50-ton Pinta, and the Nia. Besides carrying glass balls, small mirrors, and Bell's small sundries from dollar stores, the fleet also carried 3 letters of credence, 2 blank, to be filled in upon request, and 1 addressed to the Mongol Khan of China. Influenced by Marco Polo's travels, Europeans at the time believed that China was still ruled by the Mongols. Little did they know that the Ming dynasty had already been established for over 120 years, demonstrating the depth of information isolation between Europe and Asia at the time. The fleet first rested in the Canary Islands before sailing westward, following the Canary Islands latitude. This arrangement was based on Columbus's calculations that Japan and the Canary Islands, at their easternmost point, were at the same latitude. As long as they maintained this latitude, they could reach Japan directly and avoid getting lost. His calculations proved off by another 10 degrees, but for the people of his time, this was still quite satisfactory. 3 days later, the westernmost islands of the Canary Islands disappeared from the horizon, and the fleet officially bid farewell to the Old World and entered the deep sea. At a glance, the sea was nothing but water. To prevent his crew from panicking about being so far from the mainland, Columbus began to deliberately understate his speed and distance traveled. A week after leaving port, a sailor noticed that the compass needle had deviated 1 degree westward. The sailors panicked, believing the compass to be malfunctioning. After all, a malfunctioning compass meant the ship had lost its way in the vast ocean. However, Columbus calmly explained that it wasn't a malfunctioning compass, but rather the movement of the North Star. He then ordered the fleet to steer north, and soon the compass returned to normal. Today, we know that the compass wasn't malfunctioning, and the North Star wasn't moving. Rather, it was due to the declination between the geographic and magnetic North Pole. However, Europeans previously sailed primarily southward, making the declination difficult to detect. This demonstrates that despite his limited education, Columbus possessed considerable seafaring experience. After all, he had sailed to the Gulf of Guinea on Portuguese merchant ships, made numerous voyages between the Azores and Madeira Islands and mainland Portugal, and even sailed north to Ireland and Iceland. This wealth of experience, combined with a passionate and persistent heart and a silver tongue, put him squarely on the brink of discovering the New World. 10 days after leaving port, they noticed ripe green grass drifting offshore, as if freshly cut from the ground. Excited, the crew thought they were nearing land, but soon, the grass grew ever wider, stretching as far as the eye could see. In reality, they had entered the Sargasso Sea, known as a maritime graveyard. While seemingly calm, the surface clumps of sargassum are extremely deadly. Similar to kelp, once a ship became entangled in it, it could have trapped the crew. Even more terrifying was the absurdly vast Sargasso Sea, stretching 3,700 kilometers long and 1,800 kilometers wide, almost the size of Australia. It was formed by the North Atlantic Current, the North Equatorial Current, and the Cold Canary Current. Fortunately, the Sargasso Sea was not densely packed, but rather had gaps, allowing for safe passage by experienced navigators with proper command. Columbus proved to be such a navigator, and his fleet fortunately navigated the southern Sargasso Sea. 2 weeks after leaving port, Columbus ordered the water's depth to be measured to determine their location. However, after lowering a rope more than 300 meters, no bottom was found. 16 days after leaving port, a riot broke out on board, as no sailors had ever been so far from land. Some sailors cursed Columbus, saying, "You foreigner, are you going to sacrifice our lives for your own wealth?" Others advocated throwing Columbus overboard and letting him drown. Unaware of the end of the ocean, Columbus could only try his best to deceive his men, declaring he would lead them to India and refusing to give up until he achieved his goal. The crisis was finally resolved, and the fleet sailed peacefully for another 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, a month after leaving the Old World, the crew became restless again. Under pressure, Columbus summoned the captain, first mate, and other key personnel for a meeting. At the meeting, Columbus emphatically persuaded them that they were getting farther from Spain and closer to India, and that continuing onward was safer than turning back. After much debate, the meeting ultimately decided to sail for another 3 days, returning if no land was sighted after that. On October 11, the 3-day deadline expired, with no sign of land. However, the sailors began to discover reeds and canes, even a sharpened stick, and a worked plank, clear evidence of human presence, and their hopes were rekindled. That night, Columbus was surprised to discover a flickering light ahead. He ordered his lookouts to keep their eyes open, not to doze off. At 2 in the morning, the lookout on the Campania suddenly shouted, "Land! Land!" This cry startled Columbus and the slumbering crew. At daybreak, lush green land finally emerged from the mist. It was October 12, 1492. After 36 days of sailing without sight of land, the fleet finally reached the first land in the Western Hemisphere, which Columbus named San Salvador.